Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. PARAG GAD, who is the founder and CEO of SpineX, a medical bioelectric solutions company conducting advanced clinical trials of its non-invasive therapy for cerebral palsy and urinary incontinence. He has 13 plus years of research and product development experience in both academia and startups, and he has co-authored over 65 scientific papers and holds over 8 patents. So Parag, really appreciate you taking time and being part of our humble podcast. Cerebral palsy, it's like a huge problem. Could you start with, giving us what is cerebral palsy? What is the reason we get cerebral palsy? And how much do we understand about the condition?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast, Eddie. I appreciate the opportunity. So cerebral palsy is a neurodevelopmental condition that occurs due to, it could be due to, multiple causes. It's essentially a trauma that occurs to the brain, either due to lack of oxygen during birth or in vitro, or a combination of various reasons. But essentially, it's a neurodevelopmental condition. And some of these children that live with cerebral palsy have developmental delays, and that delay could lead to a range of symptoms, right? From an inability to voluntarily control muscles, to increased spasticity, to increased pain, inability to sleep very well. So the symptoms associated with cerebral palsy are multifold. So it's hard to really comprehend what a child living with cerebral palsy goes through, but it's a variety of various symptoms. Our focus is more on the sensory motor side of things, which is essentially movement disorders. So how can we control movement, and how can we allow these children to learn how to move after having lived with cerebral palsy their entire life?
Right. So I mean, before we get into SpineX and the therapy that you're developing, now the cerebral palsy has different levels, right? It's got from the mild to the severe levels. Could you can you explain that?
Yeah. So on the classical scale, which is called the GMFCS scale, which is a gross motor functional classification, it's level 1 through level 5, where level 1 is the least severe and level 5 is the most severe. And the range here is for a child with level 1 who may seem fairly quote unquote normal from the outside, but they live through cerebral palsy and have to endure frequent falls. Their gait pattern is impaired, where they may not have symmetric gait pattern. One side may be more impaired than the other, because of which they are unable to walk normally. They fall frequently, versus a child with a level 2, which is more severe, starts having more symptoms. A child with a level 3 would be dependent on a walker or would be dependent on crutches to actually ambulate, versus the level 4 and level 5 would then be dependent on a wheelchair to actually move around. Children with level 5 CP, which is the most severe form, are limited in function, where they cannot sit upright on their own, cannot hold their head up, and are requiring external support to go through daily activities of activities of daily living.
One of my friends' child happens to have cerebral palsy, and I've seen the child grow up, and it's extremely draining on the parent, and obviously not just the parent, but the child itself. And I hope that people such as yourself, find ways to make life better, not just for the patient, with the child or the grown up, but also the parents, because it's something which kind of affects everyone. Now these neurological conditions, which affects there's various neurological disorders. Cerebral palsy happens to be one of them. For that, we need to understand the human brain, right? So what's the current understanding of the human brain that we have at this point in time?
Well, that's a complex question that you ask, Eddie. The understanding of the human brain, when I take a holistic approach to it, or a philosophical approach, is that once there is a trauma that occurs, or any form of an injury or a disorder, it cannot be repaired. That's the current thinking about the human brain. Well, we sometimes give it a little too much credit about what function can the brain be responsible for, which obviously is a lot. But when you look at it from a neurophysiological standpoint, the brain is essentially giving you the command of to do or not to do, or to go or not to go. When people talk about muscle memory, you associate that with muscles, and you've learned certain things. Now I'm going to take a slightly tangential approach to my answer. When you talk about the brain, you cannot talk about it in isolation. You've got to talk about the brain in sync with the spinal cord. The brain and spinal cord are not two different organ systems. They're part of one big network, one big system. The key difference between the two is that the brain is essentially giving you the executive command to go or not to go. How to make that happen is what is controlled by the spinal cord. And that's the understanding that's been developing over the last 10, 15 years, which is the critical contribution that the spinal cord and the role that the spinal cord plays in actually controlling movement, controlling function of all forms. And I'll take an example here. When you're driving from, say, work to home and home to work, which is a route that you have done hundreds of times prior, you would know exactly how to drive, where to turn, where the potholes are, how much accelerator to press, when to hit the brakes. You don't necessarily have to think about it. It's automatic in nature. It's built into your system. And that's because the spinal cord is responding to external stimuli. When the red light turns green, you don't think about shifting your foot from the brake to the accelerator. You automatically do it. That's being done by the spinal cord. The brain is lost in its own thoughts, it's thinking, it's having a conversation, it's listening to music, it's trying to change the radio channels. It's not really paying attention to driving. The spinal cord is really what is controlling driving. I mentioned muscle memory. Muscle memory is actually, more appropriately, should be called spinal memory. The spinal cord has that memory about how to generate movement and is responding to external stimuli, be it sensory information, be it auditory information, be it visual information.
Could you elaborate on your peers that you have who are looking at invasive approach, because yours is like a non-invasive approach, and what's the cutting edge of work going on globally, when you're looking at your treatment therapy approaches invasively for cerebral palsy?
So I'll sort of paint a little bit of a picture here. When we started the work in this field back in about 15 years ago, I was lucky enough to join a team that was already involved with some of the work being done. And the father figure in this field is my professor by the name of Reggie Edgerton, who's been working on this in this area for close to 50 years. So it's not like this idea came about overnight. It's been a work in progress for decades now. Having said that, in terms of the invasive approaches, our team was the first to demonstrate in one individual with complete paralysis caused by spinal cord injury, when you used an epidural stimulation device, which is an implantable device, they could regain not just the ability to stand independently, but also regain voluntary movement after just a few sessions of training. That is the first demonstration that this could be done. We could regain voluntary movement after complete paralysis with an epidural implant. Since then, there are several teams that have taken on the challenge and are developing not just newer technologies, but are understanding the physiological aspects of regaining voluntary control using an epidural implant. We took a tangential approach where we started developing technologies associated with the non-invasive approach, but with the same scientific principle, which is the ability for us to electrically neuromodulate the spine and regain voluntary control. Right now, there are, I would say, at least 5 to 10 teams around the world, some based in America, some based in Switzerland, some based in Australia, that are developing new technologies associated with stimulating the spinal cord with an invasive approach and ability to regain voluntary function. And I think each of those are very, very critical studies that need to be done that answer two key questions. One is, what kind of technology would be needed to generate these kind of functional improvements? And second, have a really good understanding of what the physiological aspects are and what these new physiological learnings are, and how do we leverage them to improve function.
Right. Can you talk about Skip's SpineX, the Skip for cerebral palsy?
So we've essentially developed a platform technology. And the platform technology is our non-invasive spinal lead modulation approach. Based on the technology, we've been able to create two very, very unique products, which is Scone and Skip. Skip is our pediatric device, which allows us to electrically neuromodulate the spinal cord in children with cerebral palsy, allowing them to learn how to control their muscles voluntarily, which would then result in functional improvements, including sitting upright, holding your neck, being able to stand, being able to walk, and eventually continue to regain function over the course of their lifetime. So the way we approach this is we attach hydrogel electrodes to different levels of the spine over the back and deliver very, very low intensity electrical pulses over the course of therapies, and the treatment sessions are ongoing. So children are involved in physical therapy sessions while they're receiving Skip therapy. And the sessions are ongoing for an hour a day, twice a week, over the course of 8 to 16 weeks. And based on these activities that they're involved in, they're able to regain function. What's interesting is that we're able to induce something called neuroplasticity in the brain and spine. And what the neuroplasticity does is it allows the improved function to be retained not only when the therapy is actively delivered, but also after you've stopped the therapy. So the therapy is delivered 2 hours a week, whereas you've got 140 plus hours in the week. So what happens when a child goes home after they've received therapy? Because you're inducing neuroplasticity in the brain and spine, they're able to retain that improved function and continue to perform at that same level when they're at home in the absence of active stimulation.
How cool is this? Now, how many clinical trials have you gone through? Like, how many children has this been tested on? Does this work for level 1, level 2, level 5 for regaining sensory motors? And what is this market ready at this point in time, or is it just in clinical trials?
This is still in clinical trials, and that's mainly because developing a medical device is a slow process. There's certain protocols that need to be followed. SpineX as a company, we have conducted in the CP indication. We worked with 46 children so far and have seen positive results in over 90% of this population. Now, to answer your question, does this work in a level 1 versus a level 5 child? Yes, so far we've seen, like I said, more than 90% of the children respond positively to Skip therapy. The difference being each of them respond differently based on the level of functionality that they demonstrate when they start. So for a child with level 1 who is able to ambulate, who is able to walk, you're able to improve function where they're now walking more independently. They can go up, climb up a flight of stairs without external support. They can walk they're not dependent on a wheelchair for their mobility, but can start using a set of crutches to walk. So it just depends on where they start from and the level of improvement that's possible within the same period of time. Versus a child with level 5 who's unable to sit upright, we can actually help them being able to sit independently without needing 5 other people to support them.
Right. So when the children go through these therapy, you mentioned about these electric pulses which are fired. Are these like painful electrical pulses? I mean, maybe talk a little bit more about this process, because cerebral palsy is the condition because it's the brain is not being able to send the signal to the spine.
Yeah.
How do you understand this, and which part of the or the brain or the spine needs to be stimulated enough to create neuroplasticity in the patients?
So let's establish a few facts here. The way the stimulation is delivered, it is completely pain-free, painless. It does not cause any, discomfort to the child at any given time. The children often describe it as someone tickling their back and start giggling. So it is not at all one that's causing them any pain or distress whatsoever. The nervous system, while it's complex, is also fairly logical in that sense, where we are not trying to. So why does the child with CP have the inability to move? Let's understand that for a second. Based on electrophysiological recordings, where we are recording muscle activity from the lower limbs of children, what we have understood is that the signals in the brain that are going down to the spinal cord, being processed in the spinal cord, and then going to the muscles are present, but they are miscommunicated. When they miscommunicate, the muscles are firing in the wrong way. Muscles are active. It's not like the muscles are not active. Muscles are active. The neurons are firing, very much firing, but they're just firing at the wrong time. Because of the miscommunication between the brain, spine, and muscles, the movement is not generated in the appropriate manner with the right patterns. What we're able to establish is the bidirectional communication between the spine and brain, such that the brain can send the right signals to the spine and the spine can interpret those signals appropriately. What we've been able to identify based on years of research done in both the animal models as well as the human subjects is regions of the spine that are responsible for controlling a given function. So if you stimulate over the neck area, or the neurons in the neck, we know are responsible for hand and arm function. If you look at the mid-thorax or the middle of the back, we know is responsible for some of the trunk function, cardiovascular function. The lower back or the lumbosacral spine controls circuitry that controls the lower extremity, controls some of the trunk, controls circuitry for bladder, bowel, and sexual function. So by sort of segmenting these neurons out or regions of the spine that are responsible for controlling function, we've been able to establish for a given function. So we're not trying to go down to a single neuronal level. We are stimulating such that we're activating a network. And in this case, what we are leveraging is a concept that we very simply call as the spinal cord is smart. The spinal cord knows what to do. What it requires is just enough excitation so that it can interpret the information that is being provided to it.
Intuitively, you feel that, the brain does all the cognitive processes, but, that the body, you're saying the spine also understands. It's not just something which is just taking in the signals and passing on the signals to your hands, but it's also kind of understands those things. So very, very interesting. What's the challenges for it to go to the market? And when it does go to the market, what would be the price point for that? And is India something like that you're looking at as a market?
Yes. So let's go in reverse order. Yes, India is definitely a market that we are very, very interested in. Medical device as an industry is just about getting started in India. And we are very keen to explore opportunities in India and how we can bring this technology. We are, in fact, conducting a clinical trial with a couple of sites in India, two sites, both in New Delhi, where we are actively enrolling patients for our first device, which is the SCONE device and neurogenic bladder indication, which is the urinary continence indication. So, but overall, as a geography, India is definitely up there and is of great interest to us. When SCONE and SCIP hit the market, which we're expecting them to in the next 18 to 24 months, they definitely would be competitively priced for the Indian market. I think we need to better understand what's the Indian appetite and what would they accept. But as a market, it's definitely of high interest. And we do believe that we can have a huge impact on the quality of life of children living with cerebral palsy in India with our technology devices.
Any timelines?
I would say within 2 years we're going to be on the market. But prior to that, we will be conducting clinical trials that will be needed for FDA clearance. And simultaneously with the US FDA clearance, we'll be approaching the Indian regulatory bodies for getting the device approved in India. So from a clinical perspective, I would say 12 to 18 months for the clinical trials, and from a regulatory perspective, 24 months to have the device approved.
Lovely. Now, cerebral palsy, besides the approach that you're taking, the non-invasive approach, there are others who are taking stem cell therapy, and then there are people who also do creating brain organoids, to better understand the patient's brain, stuff like that. Are there other approaches you think that you're positive about that could also lead to therapy and treatment for cerebral palsy?
I think a lot of these treatments are at a fairly early stage, and they need to continue to explore to provide a better understanding of what their observations are and what their targets are. So I think for now, I'm not being pessimistic about the approach, but I don't think there's enough information or enough knowledge we have about them, either be it stem cells or any other form of therapy, to really have a strong opinion one way or the other. But I think it's definitely an area that needs continued exploration. One of the basic principles that we had as an academic researcher was one solution is never going to be the answer for every aspect. It's going to require a team, it's going to require an army, and you're going to have to approach this in multiple different ways to find the appropriate solution. So solution A may work for person X, solution B may be needed for person Y. So to treat the entire community, you're going to have to come up with multiple solutions. So yeah, I continue to remain optimistic of the various approaches that are being developed, and would love to see various options available to patients in the near future.
Right. Yeah. So it's such an exciting point of time where there are people around the world who are working to understand the brain. I think, once we kind of completely understand the brain, there are so many neurological disorders that we would be able to address, because there's millions of people around the world who are suffering, because of these debilitating neurological disorders. I hope that, teams from all around the world could someday, come together and accelerate this process. So, these families who are waiting for these for the longest time will be, helped through the devices and the products that you guys are building. You're also working on something called a scone therapy, which is for urinary incontinence. Can you talk about that, please?
So based on the same platform technology that we developed, we were able to create a product that focuses on improvement in bladder function in individuals living with different forms of neurological conditions, such as a spinal cord injury or stroke. Now, bladder is one that most people take for granted until it is an issue that you have to deal yourself, right? So you don't really think about having to urinate until you have to go 10 times at night, or have to wake up every half an hour, or you're going to leak. So right now, if you take an example with the person living with a stroke, while you can think about them as that they have one half of their body which is impacted due to the stroke, there are several other comorbidities that they have to live with, one of them being neurogenic bladder. Now, for a stroke individual, they probably end up using the restroom anywhere from 4 to 10 times at night, or would leak. So that's a condition that is significantly impacting their quality of life, not just their own, but also the rest of the family around them. What we've been able to achieve with scone therapy is with the same principle that the spinal cord can be neuromodulated. The spinal cord contains the neurons that control certain functions, in this case, bladder, bowel, sexual function, and the ability for us to electrically neuromodulate the spine in a completely non-surgical, non-invasive manner. And with scone therapy, which is delivered an hour a day, twice a week, over the course of 12 to 24 weeks, we're able to improve function such that we reduce incontinence episodes by over 70%. We are able to reduce voiding frequency by over 40%, reduce urgency. So you don't have to rush to the restroom immediately. You have enough time to actually then go to the restroom. We can improve voiding frequency, where you don't go to the restroom 20 times a day, but every 30 minutes, but can actually now drive 3 to 4 hours before having to stop. So being able to use the restroom less frequently. So overall, has a global impact on the quality of life of the individual, because their bladder is now under their control.
When would this product be ready to hit the market?
The clinical trial for this is ongoing. We have, this is for FDA approval. We have already completed about 65% recruitment for the trial. And we're expecting the trial to be completed by first quarter of 2024. In fact, we have 2 sites in India that are actively recruiting for this and have been a huge support for the scone therapy. The product is expected to hit the market in early 2025. So in less than 18 months, we're going to have a product on the market that's going to be addressing the neurogenic bladder population.
There are several neurological conditions, right? With neuromodulation, what are the other areas you think that that we could find solutions for?
If you look at the nervous system in totality, any neurological condition results in the neurons in the nervous system being dormant, very rarely do you see the neurons being dead. So if the nervous system is dormant, we can reawaken that with electrical neuromodulation. So currently our focus is on 4 conditions: spinal cord injury, stroke, multiple sclerosis, and cerebral palsy. It has a direct application to several others: Parkinson's, people with traumatic brain injury, people with Alzheimer's, each of where the nervous system is essentially dormant. We can reactivate that with electrical neuromodulation.
How cool is that? Any message you would like to leave or convey to the patients and healthcare professionals regarding the future of non-invasive therapies for neurological disorders?
I think 2 key messages that I really want to emphasize on. The first is, these kind of therapies have shown promise, and in the media you'd see paralyzed person walks with XYZ therapy, and those are great. Those are technologies being developed, but they fail to hit the market. We're at a stage where we know this technology is real, is tangible, and we're within touching distance of making this available to the public around the world. So I think this is a signal of hope, a signal of intent from our end that technology of this nature is real and will be available sooner rather than later. And the second is that bioelectric medicine as a whole is really the next frontier for healthcare and for treatments, where we are focusing on one area, which is our expertise, which is movement disorders. It has applications beyond that in terms of cardiovascular function, breathing function, metabolic disorders. The spectrum of applications here is huge. So I really believe bioelectric medicine will play a key role in developing new therapies, new devices, new technologies in the healthcare space over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Parag, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. We're living in a fantastic point of time, and you mentioned bioelectric medicine. I think is going to play a huge role. Michael Levin is working on something which is really cool, regenerative medicine, and I think that the note was really profound. This is a signal of hope, and largely with all of these therapies, it's there, but it's extremely expensive. Cell therapies are millions and millions of dollars. But I hope that this becomes more accessible and equitable for all, because there's millions of people waiting for things like that. So wish you and your team the very best. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye bye. Thank you, Parag. Really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me, Reggie.